Failure can be real, and we see plenty of evidence of that, or it can be subjective and not shared by the rest of the world. I have lived my life haunted by a fear of failure and a sense of failure. Not trivial things like the 800-yard race I ran in when I was about 8 or 9. I couldn't believe it. The gun went off, we all started running, and I realised I was in front. So I stopped, because, why would I be in front? And then I realised, because it's a circular track and I was on the outside lane, I came in last. In fact, arguably, I'm still running. My father picked me as the smart one of the litter and concentrated his attention on stretching me to my limits. When I was 7, I remember him teaching me about logarithms and how to use a slide rule, a skill which used to be quite handy, but since the development of handheld calculators, not quite so useful. I remember when I was 8, he tried to teach me trigonometry with rather less success than logarithms, and whilst trigonometry is still useful, I don't use it very often. When I was 9, he taught me how to use the power tools in his workshop. That was good, and he used to set me tasks. In fact, I think I might have annoyed him once because he spent 6 months making a pair of loudspeaker cabinets, rather large ones, 11 cubic foot loudspeaker cabinets for a pair of 10 or 15-inch dual concentrics for the nerds amongst you. And it infuriated him that I made a similar pair in one weekend. So when I was making things, he would watch it. If I was making the task happen, he would make it a bit more difficult. The net effect of that was that I had to try harder and harder, but because the task was always being made more difficult, I always came in second. And I spent my childhood believing that I would only ever be second best. He taught me at the age of 10 to make an amplifier, an audio amplifier, a 10-watt leak valve amplifier, of course. This was the 1950s after all. I don't make valve amplifiers anymore. I don't even have a valve amplifier. That's for people who are much more fancy and fashionable than I am. But I always came in second best, notwithstanding that I'd learnt the coding of the bands on the resistors and how capacitors worked. I felt like a failure because every task that I was achieving became more difficult. Now, Dad was a surgeon, and he used to take me to the theatre with him back in the day. I remember distinctly, he wanted me to be a surgeon, and I remember when I was 11, he took me along to watch him perform a ureterolithotomy, which, as you'll all know, is the removal of a stone from the ureter. Now, he used to make me scrub up and gown and put on a mask and rubber gloves, and I'd stand beside the supine body of the patient, all masked off with green cloths, and the abdominal skin was an obscene yellow because it had been swabbed with antiseptic. And then a slice of the scalpel would reveal a layer of yellow fat, and eventually the abdominal muscle wall would be exposed. He would stab through it, poke his fingers into the stab wound and tear it apart with a sound like a tearing blanket. The point being, the muscle fibres were not cut, they were simply separated from each other. So on through the 3 layers. And then a horror of squirmy, bloody material underneath. And he lifted hooked out the ureter with his forefinger and said, "Here, feel it. You'll be able to feel the stone." And I did. I did feel the stone. I also felt something that I wouldn't feel again until years later when I found that alcohol was quite intriguing. Fortunately, a nurse noticed my response and guided me to a chair. My career as a potential surgeon ended when I was 11. After that, it was a matter of drifting through the rest of school, always feeling second best, although scooping the pool with prizes in year 12 to the surprise of everyone, especially me. And then I went to university. I became a barrister by accident. I had planned to be a management consultant. Actually, secretly, I wanted to be an artist, but management consultant was more respectable. And because there's a thing called mooting, which law students do, which is pretend courts. And only nerds did it. It was not compulsory. Only nerds did it, so I flocked to it straight away. It was a small field, which probably accounts for the fact that I was selected to go on the Monash intervarsity mooting team to New Zealand in my second last year. And as luck would have it, I won the prize as the best individual speaker. The Chief Justice of New Zealand had presided over the final moot and was talking to me after the event at the prize-giving thing, and, you know, drink ceremony, and we were all very nice. And he asked me what I was planning to do. I wasn't prepared to say I want to be an artist, so I said, well, I'm thinking of being a management consultant. He said, oh, you should go to the bar. Now, he was the most important person I'd ever met. So that was my 5 seconds of career planning. It only occurred to me recently, with a degree of amusement, and it would be characteristic of my existence so far, that maybe he meant I should go and get another glass of wine. It's actually quite a depressing thought. The consequence of all of this hit me rather painfully in 1996, and I was very much touched by what Claire spoke about, because in 1996 I was in the middle of acting for Alan Bond in a trial over in Perth, and during a break I had been invited to go to Gray's Inn, which is the heart of the London bar, and teach advocacy to the barristers of Gray's Inn. So that was quite a thing, going and teaching advocacy at the home of English advocacy. And I found every day it was almost impossible to get out of bed. I felt so crushed with a sense of failure. Objectively, I realised that this sense of failure was not real, but it's real nonetheless to the person who suffers it. And I think it's important to recognise that epic fails can be wholly in the mind of the person who experiences them. But I want to talk about a real epic failure. And this will involve a few figures, and I apologise for that. I think one of the great epic fails is one which we hover on the brink of, and Rob Oakeshott would agree with this, I suspect. And that is the possibility that because we have failed in a catastrophic way as a country to grasp the possibility that global warming is real, anthropogenic, and very serious, that we may actually spell the doom of the human race. Now, in order to put this into perspective, you need to do a little bit of figuring about the history of the universe. Let's go big and say the history of the universe. A multiverse is much more complicated to deal with. So let's say the history of the universe. If you take from the Big Bang to the present and compress them onto a 12-hour clock, starting at midday and going to midnight, each second is worth 3.2 million years. The first living creatures, the eukaryotes, sort of pond slime, emerged at 11 minutes before midnight. It took all that time. Hominids, that is to say, the great apes that became ultimately chimpanzees, bonobos, human beings, and so on, hominids emerged 5 seconds before midnight. Clearly, the time scale is too great. So let's just take from the emergence of living creatures on the Earth to the present, on the same 12-hour clock, starting at noon and going to midnight. Each second is about about 500,000 years. Hominids emerge, and I'm talking, the great apes and so on, hominids emerged half a minute before midnight. So that is also a time scale that's a bit too broad. So let's take it from the emergence of hominids to the present and compress those onto a 12-hour clock. Hominids emerge at midday. Each second is 3,500 years. Homo sapiens sapiens, which is what we recognise as human beings, appear 1 minute before midnight. The first agriculture emerged, and this is at the end of the Little Ice Age, about 12,000 years ago. The first agriculture emerged 4 seconds before midnight. The pyramids were constructed about 1.5 seconds before midnight. Jesus Christ was born about 2/3 of a second before midnight. The Norman conquest was about 1/4 of a second before midnight. And I have to say, it is difficult to look at global warming and say that we've got a good chance of lasting another 1/4 of a second. And if we don't, it will be the epic fail of the universe. Thank you.